Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have an important energy update coming, but first, measles, medical marijuana. We'll talk about that and more after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we've got a number of important topics to talk about. We've got the measles situation in the state. We've got the legislature perhaps moving medical marijuana. A bill passed the state Senate last year that would have legalized medical marijuana in the state. Joining me to talk about that and more is Dr. Karen Rizzo. She's the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Dr. Rizzo, welcome, and welcome back to the show, I can say, I think. All right, let's start with the measles situation. I mean, the big question, and you still get some reaction to, is the measles vaccine safe?
Yes, it is. The relationship to autism that was concerning many years ago has been dispelled by hard science. So the vaccination does not predispose children to autism. Yeah,
and so your point is everybody needs to get vaccinated. I understand if about 90% of the population is covered, immunized in one way, then it pretty much wipes out. And we haven't had, I mean, who sees measles? Physicians weren't seeing measles in young kids, were they, in our country for the most part?
For many years. And what happened in California was the first reintroduction of it to the states. Now, we did have a case in Chambersburg, in Pennsylvania here, but because of the effectiveness of the vaccination, it hasn't been seen for many years.
And this, particularly in infants, can lead to some pretty serious, I don't know if I'll use it, you'll correct me, you're the doctor, side effects?
Right.
And they are?
Well, initially it presents like a cold-like symptoms, but there can be systemic damage from the measles. Most concerning would be to the brain.
Right.
Hearing loss can also occur in severe cases, so it's certainly nothing to take lightly.
It's not like a light cold where it goes away, whether they see a physician or not. This
Right.
potentially creates. Does Medical Society have any position yet on whether or not the philosophic, you know, we have an exemption for philosophical purposes, and you know, various states have different rules. Have you taken a position, or are you still looking at that? Should there be a philosophic exemption, or is that something?
We advocate for vaccinations to occur.
Period, right?
Period.
End of quote.
They're safe and they're effective.
Yeah, good point.
So.
All right, let's talk about another important topic, medical marijuana. A couple of dozen states now have it. A bill passed the state Senate last year overwhelmingly. I think it was 43-7. It was bipartisan. It was, as I understand it, a liquid or pill form, not a weed form. What's your sense about medical marijuana? Its pros, its cons. Let's talk about that a bit.
Well, the Pennsylvania Medical Society is in opposition to legalizing the recreational use of marijuana. That's one point. As far as the medical uses go, it's a more complicated issue. There are studies now that are being done to look at the effectiveness of the cannabidiol oil. And that seems to be a product that may be of some value in treating children with seizure disorders. Right. There are studies going on now in Colorado, the state of Washington, and in Philadelphia at CHOP looking at that product. The information still isn't out yet, but some preliminary suggestions include perhaps there is some benefit, but it seems to be inconsistent. That's really the problem. From our perspective, we're concerned about hard science that justifies the use and the safety of it in the way it's used, the dose, the frequency, long-term complications, side effects, what's the best way to utilize it, and for how long.
Sure.
So we just don't feel the science is there yet.
So your point is you want more study, more analysis, and then as a society we can reach a conclusion. I mean, one of the things about recreational marijuana is that, you know, you don't have to state your opinion on that. This is mine. I mean, I don't think we want to ruin people's lives, you know, and, you know, decriminalize it's one thing. What we do, you know, let the legal folks handle that. But there are even some side effects from using recreational marijuana, developmental problems with young folks. I mean, there are warnings up about the use of it, about what's going on with driving. That I think is obviously a concern to the medical community as well.
Absolutely. And I think the experience in Colorado has yet to be borne out. And as time goes on and the usage increases, I think information will be acquired from that experience that may help our state figure out what our next steps are.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, it's a very different world when you go into a doctor's office today and what happens to you with issues like scope of practice and nurse practitioners and patient-centered medical homes. As I think Meryl Streep once said, it's gotten very complicated. I'm going to talk about that with Dr. Rizzo after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program. We're doing a little healthcare update with Dr. Karen Rizzo. She heads the Pennsylvania Medical Society. And doctor, let's talk a little bit about, as I said, I remember going to a doctor 10, 15 years ago. It was very different. When you go in now with scope of practice, nurse practitioners, medical center. Let's pick these pieces up. When you say scope of practice, what does that mean?
Well, it's a team approach now, and that's really what we advocate for from the Medical Society. There's various members of the team. The physician should lead the team because the physician has the most knowledge and clinical experience. But there's clearly valuable members of the team that are not physicians, and that's where the nurse practitioner comes in, midwives, physician assistants. All of these people help in taking care of patients. Mm-hmm. Their roles are a little different based on their experience. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to do the same thing, provide high quality in an efficient way and keep the patient safe.
Sure. Now, I think in the old days, the physician would literally do everything, right? I mean, everything. You may get walked to the patient room by a nurse and that would be it, or they would take care of you. But now, can they do, vaccinations? They do the tests. I mean, basically, is that what you're talking about?
Well,
it's deeper than that with the interrelationship. Go ahead.
Right. Depending on what the need of the patient is determines the extent of the evaluation. But for certain problems, nurse practitioners and physician assistants are very qualified to take care of. Yeah. It's the more complicated situations where physician supervision has to be included because not all issues are straightforward.
Yeah, and the diagnosis obviously is a physician, and what you need to do after you get diagnosed. I mean, that seems to me that's important. There's something else. I mean, the bottom line here is it's now all about collaboration, right? It's all about collaboration. Not everybody doing their own thing, out going in 100 different directions.
Correct. And collaboration leads to high quality and patient safety. Oversight by the physician has to be an integral part of all that because that'll reduce redundancy and inappropriate testing and increase cost.
Yeah. One of the questions that has arisen is, are you all overtrained? Are family doctors overtrained? Now, I want my family doctor to be pretty knowledgeable, don't get me wrong. But
well, I think when you look at the amount of clinical education that goes into becoming a primary care doctor or any physician, it's based on the responsibility we have to take care of that patient. It's thousands of hours, anywhere from 12,000 to 16,000 hours of clinical experience is what people get that are physicians. Compared to nurse practitioners, it's in the 500 to 700 hour range. So there's clearly a difference. Mm-hmm. But as a physician, that responsibility rests with us. And for many people, the physician, the primary care doctor, may be their first experience with getting health care or getting an answer for a concern they have. So you want to make sure that first encounter is a good one and an accurate one, so that something is not overlooked or missed.
Yeah, talking about particularly family doctors, and we can also get into some specialties. There's this big, it looks, at least in the reports that I've read, that we have a pretty important and critical shortage of physicians. You had an organization that obviously looks at questions like this. And now we have the Affordable Care Act, and we don't need to get into debate whether it's good or bad, but what we do know is that there'll be more people because of the coverage, entering the healthcare system who didn't before. What is your sense that how critical is it even critical that we have a physician shortage?
Well, I think depending on where you are in the state, varies. That answer will vary. And what we found with nurse practitioners, that they also, even if they were independent like they are in some other states, they also have a tendency not to go to rural areas.
Yeah.
So the issue of independence with them does not seem to affect that outcome.
Right.
They still want to practice where physicians practice as well. So we don't find that their independence would change that scenario.
I get your point. And then we also have, and maybe we'll have you back, we're just about out of time, we can talk about this at another point, is, some physicians reluctant to take, Medicaid patients, and we're going to have, we're in this change taking place in Harrisburg now into what the Governor Wolf has called simple traditional Medicaid. I think I understand that as opposed to the program that Governor Corbett has in place. So maybe that's something you can come back and we can talk about, once we get into the Medicaid expansion, what's going on with physicians, why they don't, wouldn't take patients as versus why they do. At any rate, finally, is there any evidence that we're getting more doctors into medical school? Or is this something that we're going to have to work out over time?
Well, we've had a new medical school started in the Scranton area, so that certainly helps. I think last year they had 7,000 applications for 100 spots.
Wow.
So that adds to the manpower issue in our state, but we educate so many. The next step is to keep them here.
Keep them, that's a good point. All right, thanks for coming in. Great update. All right, what's going on in the world of energy? If you stay with us, you're going to find out.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Well, we're ready for an important energy update. We're going to talk about the energy outlook prices, what's going on with replacing pipelines, important subject. Terry Fitzpatrick, he's the president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, is on the program along with Bob Beard. He's the president and CEO of UGI. I used to be a customer for a long, long time. My parents were customers. I wanted to tell you that. At any rate, all right, Terry, you and I have chatted frequently about this. Gasoline prices, unbelievably low levels. It's good for some people and bad for other people. I guess for folks who drive a lot and fill up their gas tanks, it's good. What's the overall energy outlook?
Well, the overall energy outlook for Pennsylvania is really very, very good. Better than we could have dreamed perhaps a decade ago. The Marcellus, the supplies from the Marcellus have affected, of course, your natural gas bill, and Bob's going to tell us some about that, about what's happened with UGI. Also your electricity bill, because that gas is used to generate electricity, and the price of the wholesale price of electricity tends to follow the price of natural gas. So really, from a supply standpoint and a price standpoint, we're in better shape than we've been in a long time.
Yeah. Bob, is there any evidence that this is likely to change? I mean, I'm sure you follow all this. I can never figure out why it dropped. You know, I always thought, well, everybody's manipulating, not in our state, but, you know, nationally manipulating the price of gas. When you're looking ahead, when UGI is looking ahead, are you planning on these prices to stay where they are, or you think, you know, inevitably, don't they have to go up?
We see a considerable amount of stability in the out years because we now have, with the Marcellus Shale, locally produced, locally developed natural gas. And for us, you know, that stability is a big selling point. And
the one thing that Terry and I have talked about over the years that I still don't quite understand why it can't be done is to use natural gas to replace petroleum for automobiles. I mean, you know, you would think that given, you know, the fact that this would benefit us in our country, right, Terry?
Absolutely.
Either one of you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there is some movement towards that. In fact, I think they're putting some gas refueling stations in on the turnpike now. It's being used a lot for like local bus systems and wherever there's local traffic, because you're close to the infrastructure to refuel it.
Fleets.
And that's really the problem. The infrastructure to build the refueling operations is very, very expensive, and it takes a huge commitment to do it. So it really isn't surprising that it's slow, I think, for that to get moving.
But you go ahead.
we have, I think, 9 stations across our system that are in some stage of planning. And Terry's exactly right. I think that natural gas as a fuel grows from the fleet business out. And having a fleet of trucks or cars that, you know, leave from the same location, return to the same location at the end of the day is important. And the economics are great from a fuel standpoint, but I think we need to get to a point where there's an economy of scale with the vehicles themselves.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, and then who knows with electric, and I mean, it seems like all of this is in such a huge state of flux. Over the course of many years, Terry, you know, has been on the program giving us the energy update. We've talked about that, and it's almost impossible to know where it all goes. But natural gas is cleaner than petroleum, correct?
It is.
Correct.
So, and then we got the whole debate over nuclear. All right, we're going to run for a break. When we come back, I want to talk about how important the pipeline replacement is and what you're doing there as an example of what I think is going on in many places around the country. Energy Update continues after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Well, our energy update continues with Terry Fitzpatrick and Bob Beard. I mean, we talked about this before when we get into the business of infrastructure replacement, and we talked about roads, bridges, and mass transit and how important it is. In a sense, taking these old pipelines and making sure that they're safe and that, you know, they work is, in a sense, sort of the functional equivalent of that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
No, absolutely. Safety and reliability of a natural gas distribution and transmission network. I mean, that's apex for us. That's the most important thing that we do.
So tell me basically where you do it is sort of when you reach, Terry was explaining this to me.
Sure. From the producing areas of the country where natural gas is, where they drill for and produce natural gas, typically that gas will be put on or in a large diameter, high pressure interstate pipeline. UGI takes the gas from those pipelines, and then we distribute it to the communities across Pennsylvania. We're in
into the households.
Into the households, right. We're in 45 counties across the state,
Okay.
750 communities. So we know Pennsylvania.
Right.
And we have a very aggressive and robust replacement plan of all of our mains, and we've got 13,000 mains running throughout the state. It's a tremendous amount of piping.
Now, is there a health risk if these aren't done properly? I mean, you know what I'm talking about. If they're old and they need replacement, I mean, what are some of the problems if it's not done that, for obvious reasons?
Well, one of the big issues in the industry generally, particularly in the Northeast, I would say, where the systems are older, you know, they were built, you know, longer ago, is replacing the old cast iron and bare steel pipes, because you know, the newer pipes, the plastics are more resilient, and they are better in a lot of ways, and they're safer too. So it is a priority to do that. Costs a lot of money to do it as well, and pragmatically, you need the resources, you need to stage that. But, you know, it's been a big emphasis of the industry generally, and particularly here in Pennsylvania, where a couple of years ago a law was passed to help the companies be able to recover the costs of doing that more quickly, to provide an incentive to accelerate those programs.
And what's that law do? I mean, how does that work?
It allows the companies. Previously, you always had to wait until you filed a rate case until you could get any of the costs back. This allows the companies to recover it on more of a current basis.
Public Utilities Commission guy, you know, he knows all this stuff. So, so does the fact that natural gas prices have fallen, petroleum prices have fallen, energy prices are generally, you know, falling, or, you know, certainly in some cases remaining the same, not going up. How does that help you kind of replace all this, you know, infrastructure?
Sure. Well, we look at growth and infrastructure replacement somewhat separately. The infrastructure replacement, UGI, of that 13,000 miles of piping, 85% is constructed of contemporary materials, the plastic materials that Terry was referring to. And that's helping us to create a lot of jobs across the state, because we're spending a lot of capital with that replacement work. From a growth perspective, when we saw the price of natural gas come down and stabilize over the last handful of years, it makes us very attractive relative to competing fuels. And an example, just last year, we converted from other sources of fuel more than, I think, 13,000 customers and added 18,000 customers across the state. So I think people are starting to see the value of locally produced natural gas, as you pointed out, stable costs and reducing costs. I'll give you a statistic. Since, let's say, 2008, I think we've converted 45,000 homes from fuel oil to natural gas. Just last year alone, those 45,000 households saved $75 million in heating costs. So it's significant.
Right. Look, thanks for coming in with the energy update. We'll see. And by the way, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.